Good afternoon. This is John Young with Sunbelt Business Brokers. And before we start the webinar, I'd like to tell a little story as an introduction. I'm sure you're all familiar with selling a house. For businesses, though, business owners are much more often attached to the business that they have developed and lived with for the past 10 to 20 years, more so than the homeowner. Selling a business means entering another chapter of life, which means many unknowns. Emotions can become intense. Selling a home in California, a very short process, is usually pretty much straightforward. A few inspections, maybe a quick small renegotiation of the price, and bingo, it's done. However, for businesses, things can change during the sale process, where a house typically stays about the same during the month it takes to close. Inventory changes, markets change, customer needs can change slightly or significantly during the sale process. What working capital was at the time of the offer versus the amount it is at closing is always different. Also, inventory can vary greatly from the time the letter of intent is made to the time of closing. Adjustments for these things are made at closing and can have significant impact on the value of a business. If there are other buyers waiting in the wings, a structured sale process, which we will be covering today, can be the most effective tool for the seller and your investment banker or broker. In this way, using these tools, the seller maintains more control because the seller's team creates and controls the process from beginning to end. He or she can control important factors such as timing, due diligence, the first draft of the definitive agreement, and compare multiple competitive bids and help you choose the ultimate and best winner. So I'd like to introduce Joan Young, broker here at Sunbelt Business Brokers.
Good morning. Good afternoon. I guess at noon you could say either. You get away with it. Welcome to the webinar today, and we're going to be talking about the secrets to getting the most for your business, which I'm sure that got your attention. We're going to be discussing today the differences between a controlled auction and a negotiated sale. I am the president of Sunbelt Business Brokers, Greater Bay Area, and John Young, my partner and co-owner, will be sharing some of the points as well. By the way, just a quick plug for Sunbelt. We are the largest business brokerage network, mergers and acquisitions company with 185 offices worldwide. It was more like 235 before the recession, but 185 of us survived. Our office is based in San Jose on Taylor Street, and we've been helping buyers and sellers throughout the Bay Area, over 18 years now. Prior to starting Sunbelt, Greater Bay Area, I owned FranNet of the Bay Area and helped buyers get into franchising. At the end of the webinar, I want to make sure you know that we're open to your questions, and we have a box to the far left where you can type that, and then I'll be answering those. So put them in as we go along while they're fresh in your mind. And we're going to cover probably most of those. And if you don't get your question answered today, please feel free to give John or myself a call, and our numbers will be on the slide at the end. I've put your phones on mute so we won't be interrupted by ringing phones. So let's get started. John?
Okay. One moment. Let's get to our slide.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. So we're going to be taking a broad overview of what I termed a structured sale process in the intro, and that's going to have some terminologies that we ought to discuss first. And the two are controlled auction and negotiated sales. Controlled auctions are usual and customary in mergers and acquisitions, but have some applicability to business sales in the smaller range, maybe $1 to $3 million. And negotiated sales are actually appropriate for both categories, but are more common in the smaller Main Street businesses. So what is a controlled auction? There are a couple different categories, but the controlled auction is a means of acquiring multiple buyers to look at a business at approximately the same time and present information to them at approximately the same time and accept offers at the same time. Buyers will range from strategic buyers to financial buyers to many other categories. Each will have a different value of your business. Your ability to look at them at the same time is key to this process. A negotiated sale, on the other hand, is usually for smaller businesses, but can be for larger businesses. And you would be dealing with one person at a time in that case. There may be several people who are interested, but it would all be handled on one at a time. So those are the two categories that we're going to talk about this afternoon. So in comparing them, for a strong and desirable business, a controlled auction will bring multiple offers to be compared side by side from a financial standpoint, as well as any other personal terms and issues that you are, as a seller, concerned with. Those can range from maintaining employees, maintaining the business in its current condition, to your personal legacy. Negotiated sale, on the other hand, is process of finding one buyer out of a multitude of buyers and dealing solely with that person in the end. So let's move on. So what are the strengths and weaknesses of the controlled auction? Let's look at the strengths first. There are quite a few, so we'll be running through the slides. Competition among buyers will motivate them to pay more for a business if it's really desirable, and the desirability is a key to this process. It allows you, the seller, to release the information in a controlled manner in the most efficient way, whereas you're not doing one at a time over weeks or months. You're presenting to several people at the same time, and makes it easier on you and more current information. You're not always updating your bank records and other things because a month has passed. Then we deal with webinars and present the business to several buyers at one time. We've had up to 5 or 6 buyers at the same time on a webinar I did recently, sometimes up to 10.
Yeah, I've had some at 10.
And the information that's provided questions actually have been gathered in advance, if they're willing to, and we can answer all the common questions at one time. I say we, that would be you, the seller, would be answering those questions through the webinar. And then if there are any particular questions that buyers have, and they usually do, that are specific to their company, considered confidential, we would follow up on those later. Another advantage in this case is the negotiating strength on every deal is in your pocket, and you can control the purchase price that you're willing to accept in comparison to others, the timing, the extent of due diligence, all those things. Not totally in your control, of course, but you can control them within reason. And then your eggs are not on all one basket. several buyers reduces the risk that if a seller falls out during due diligence, and they can for those reasons mentioned earlier about market changes, their need changes. Gee, we've seen in corporate acquisitions that the quarterly reports weren't as good and the buyer backed out. But in that particular case, we had other buyers in the wings, and we brought them forward immediately, and the process continued. Our activity to reach buyers is controlled also, and we could reach more buyers this way and talk to them initially and develop what their value structure is before bringing them in for the webinar. Our ability to reach out through our network is that we have Sunbelt offices in 9 countries. We have about 180 offices, and we are in not constant contact, but we're in contact with them through the Sunbelt network. It's a tremendous advantage that we could provide. It's another little promo for Sunbelt. And the auction process will shift the risk from the seller to the buyer, that you know what value you have in the marketplace by talking to multiple people at nearly the same time, and then it's their risk to beat the competition. What I would consider somewhat neutral is that you are considering several offices. You can pick offers, excuse me. You can pick the one that provides the least risk and meets your seller's objectives, financial and otherwise. Some of the weaknesses are, we start here with final negotiations can be more detailed through the initial processes and take more time.
What kind of time?
Due diligence can go from 45 days, maybe 60 days at a minimum on larger deals, up to 90 days. And there are more people involved, so attorney-to-attorney conversations and passing information back and forth kind of extends the process. But the negotiation, though, you have handled that up front. Now, maybe the most important weakness is that some buyers will reject the competitive atmosphere. That means they will say, often to us, we hear, he either wants to deal with me or I'm not interested. That particular kind of buyer is likely to offer less at the outset, but not always. So you have to be wise in choosing whether you go with the controlled auction or not, and in that case it breaks down to a targeted auction and a broad auction. So let me define that quickly. Broad auction would go out into the marketplace identifying 20, 30, 40, 50 potential buyers, or going out onto the websites, Axial and others, where multiple buyers can look and express interest. Or it could be a targeted auction where you go out to 5 or 6 of the best that you have pre-surveyed. So there are ways of handling this weakness, but that is a key issue in the sale of business through a controlled auction. Another weakness is in this form, non-cash terms are part of the typical offers, and they can be significant. They can be notes, earnouts, could be equity participation, which is a risk to you, depending on the quality of the buyer. You may not want to do that, and the upside could be the second bite of the apple, as it's called, where your equity interest grows with the acquirer. And you, of course, make that choice yourself. I think Joan now will handle the negotiated sale.
Thank you, John. This is probably the more typical way of selling a business in Main Street. It could go up even to $2 million in asking price. It could for Main Street deals, but typically it's $1 million and under. And this is what attracts most buyers. It is common for small business. These go more quickly than the other. I've had negotiated sales go in 3 months from the time we started marketing to the time we closed. But as far as once you get an offer, this can, if they're using the Small Business Administration, SBA, then it could take 45 days from when the offer is accepted. If it's cash, it could be even sooner. So that's the attractive part of it. A buyer may pay more for this kind of business to avoid having that auction, because then they know there's could be 3 or 4 offers, and it's not going to be as attractive for them.
Yeah, let me add something here. The world is never black and white, so this actually can be a weakness as opposed to a strength. That what you want to avoid is having a buyer offer too much for the business, and that means you know the value of your business through evaluation, and sometimes they will do that. They'll offer too much to tie the business up and then get in and look at it. And quite frequently what will happen is during due diligence, they will begin to see the weaknesses that they avoided at the outset and start renegotiating the price down to where it should have been in the first place. And once you start getting beaten up, the price can go lower and lower. So
they're hoping to take it off the market?
Essentially, yes.
Yeah. Okay, good. All right. So the negotiated sale, here are just some examples of it. Number 5, you may decide to sell your business to your management team. There may be a key person that would do that, or do an ESOP, which is an employee stock ownership plan. Don't see it very often, but once in a while a team is so tight and the owner's willing to just take a huge note for their business. I don't see it very often, but it has happened. Number 6, you may have a buy-sell agreement and you feel compelled to sell it. That might be a partner of yours that may want to buy it, and maybe you're having health issues or getting older and you feel compelled to sell. Or maybe if you're a franchise and you know the franchisor could take your business back if you're not performing. So that's another kind of a neutral example of where somebody might sell their business. And then the other, and I just saw this, where someone had an exit objectives to keep the business pretty much running exactly like they had it running, and they wanted the company to stay the same, of course the employees to stay the same, all the same cultures that was being part of the business. But in this case, you will want to identify an individual buyer who will accept those limited terms and your objectives. This really does limit you a bit, because so many buyers may like your business and your product and your service, but they have their own ideas of how to run it. So this could limit your buying group by saying you want it done this way. So the weakness of a negotiated sale, buyers do typically prefer this type of sale versus a competitive auction, because they know that there's going to be probably quite a few offers coming in with the other, and they want to be the only one. A buyer may approach you unsolicited. It could be a client, it could be a competitor, and it could be a good add-on business for them. so making them kind of a synergistic buyer. So that's something that be aware of. But often when somebody approaches you, you're not prepared because you haven't had a valuation done. So in this case, you will want to have a valuation. I mean, if you are considering selling in the next year, go ahead and get a valuation done. You can always update it at the end of the year or when you're seriously ready, because somebody could come to you and you don't really know what it's worth. And if you identify a buyer who you think's the only likely buyer for your company, so there must be, if there's only one likely buyer, you probably have some warts or some things wrong with it for that to happen. But it could be somebody, maybe even an employee you really like, or a key supplier, or even a customer that might fit. So you're definitely not in the strongest position in this case. And then 11, you could possibly need to sell quickly due to health or divorce. And this is when sellers will negotiate with the most convenient buyer. And of course, you're not going to get paid as much when you're in that situation. So I hope that never happens to anybody.
Yeah. Joan, can I add something?
Sure.
Yeah, this gets into another whole subject and webinar, potentially, and that would be exit planning. That the weaknesses here in negotiated sale are often tied in with the lack of good exit planning. A 3-year strategy is optimal. 1 and 2 is doable, so that you're not falling prey to these weaknesses.
Especially larger transactions. And the weaknesses go on. Okay, I think I said 11 twice. Apologize for that. So buyers do like to leverage in a negotiated sale without the presence of competitors. In a negotiated sale, the buyer can demand concessions, where in a controlled auction, it just doesn't happen. They're not able to have much leverage there. So the buyer is more in control, and the seller's really at their mercy. So that's the problem when there is only one buyer interested. Your business just may be too small to attract multiple buyers. A negotiated sale with a single buyer may just be the only option. And it can be a good option if the business doesn't have sufficient value to attract financial buyers or strategic buyers willing to pay cash for your well-run business. So we can usually tell after an hour conversation what's the best strategy for you in attracting people.
Yeah, something that ties into that is what we call, and you may have heard, is that the business is all about Bob. Small businesses are commonly all about Bob, which essentially means there's not much structure to the business. The owner is the business. But I've seen, one business we sold a few years back was sold $14 million. Great manufacturing business, but the owner essentially ran that business and had very little middle management, and all the controls were in his hands. And luckily, there was a company that saw this and could absorb it and provide all the rest of the management. So we were really blessed in that case. But in most cases, the personal relationships that the owner has developed, the intellectual property that's in the owner's mind, all those things don't transfer well to another single buyer, and the value of the business can drop drastically.
And then you also will get seller notes and any other terms. They're always included in these kind of sales. All cash in smaller transactions for your business could require a significant discount. 10% is more likely, but we have seen it even 15 or 20% if you get all cash for your business. So that's why many sellers say, well, I'll carry 10% or I'll carry 20% as long as it's secured. And so that's, there are, I'd say I think statistics say that I think it's 70% of all businesses have a note of some type, so it's a pretty big percentage. Okay.
All right, Joan, thank you for that
I'm not
section.
done. I'm not done.
Oh.
But go ahead.
Yeah. Probably the summary of what we've said so far is the planning of your exit from the business. Your goal is, as a seller, is not to find just a buyer, but to find the best buyer. And you have to define what the best means. It might be for financial reasons in retirement that you want to get the most money out of the business. It might be you would like to pay the least taxes in the year that you sell the business.
Mm-hmm. I've even, John, had people choose the buyer that, part of the offer from all of their buyers was for the seller to stay on for a period of time, and it was a lengthier time, 2 years. And so they picked the person they liked the best and countered their offer because that's who they wanted to work with. So to them, that was the best buyer because they liked working with them.
And the culture that you have developed in the business, most buyers have developed a culture that they enjoy and the employees enjoy. They certainly have the desire for legacy of the company and the company's name, and most sellers or owners of a business really appreciate their employees. They don't want to just walk away and leave the employees up in the air. So those can have financial impact on the sale of the business and how it's sold, and certainly they fall into the category of the best buyer. So as business brokers and M&A advisors, we can provide the research, the persistence, and the skill to get a deal done. We know how to find the buyers. We know how to engage them and keep them at the negotiating table and at the closing table. We can often anticipate what issues are going to come up, and an issue isn't bad unless it just has not been addressed beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the advantage of having a good team with you, which includes your CPA, your transactional attorney, a financial advisor. Many people can be part of that team.
Mm-hmm. Good.
So just quickly, where do your buyers come from? That's a common question. They, for larger businesses, will come from private equity groups and family offices. Those businesses of interest would be ones having an EBITDA of over $1 million. Right now, even $1.5 million to $3 million are targets for private equity groups. Industry players, we use players there because they're entrepreneurs that will commonly go out, buy a business, build it, and they will grow it and sell it and move on to the next business. Leave it to somebody who enjoys the operational aspect. Adjacencies, it's a term related to businesses that would support your core business. I dealt many years ago with a company that was in building products, very large company. You might say they were wholesale and retail business, but they were large enough to start looking at acquiring manufacturers of some of their products, distributors of their products so they could distribute both to themselves and to other companies. Being in business products, they went and they started looking at forest acquisitions and lumbering. And now that's called vertical expansion, but those are adjacencies. They help this business control costs and availability of products. Competitors are another source of buyers for your business.
That can be tricky though, can't it?
It can be, and confidentiality is a key issue there. And if we were dealing with competitors in an assignment that we had to sell a business, we of course would deal with you, the seller, in whether this competitor should be disclosed or not. They of course would have non-disclosure agreements, and we have a second level of non-disclosure and non-compete for serious competitors. Experienced buyers, similar to industry players, but they're more of financial buyers that are looking for a single platform that they're going to grow and own for an extended period of time. Trade associations could be a source through their magazines, and those, of course, could be anything from competitors. They're just associates of the trade association. Media and internet searches are a common way that businesses are presented to the marketplace, and just general networking of yourself and your M&A broker team.
Okay. I'd like to just touch on the process before we take your questions. And we're going to have a follow-up webinar to really go into the details of the process. There's just so much to cover, from opening escrow to closing. So it's going to be another webinar, and we'll be glad to invite you to that. But first of all, the investment banker or broker will definitely narrow the best buyer down to maybe 3 or 4 that will probably fit your profile and make a realistic offer to you. So that's kind of fun. We just did that a year ago with we had two different sign manufacturing companies, and we had 3 for one, 4 for the other, and in both cases we had that agreed upon to which one that the seller wanted to work with. Well, the offers came within a week in both cases of having the webinar, and the potential people were on the webinar, and then they presented their offers, and we were moving on down the road. It was great. They're fun. Your next step after looking at the offers, you'll get an expression of interest, and basically that's somebody saying that we are interested in pursuing this, and then they follow that up with a letter of intent. Or for smaller businesses, you may get the asset purchase agreement at that time. In some cases, it could be a stock purchase of a business under $1 million, let's say, but usually if it's a stock purchase, they will do a letter of intent to start off with. Wouldn't you say? And then after that is agreed on, the person that you're obviously going to work with, you like their letter of intent. Now they're going to start due diligence, which can take anywhere, I've seen it done in 3 weeks and as much as 2 or 3 months. So that due diligence can become pretty complex for the larger transactions. But during the due diligence is when the buying group is working on their their definitive agreement, I should say. We've already have the letter of intent, but during that they're doing their definitive agreement, which we didn't put in there. And then once that is all signed off on, they're pleased with everything they've seen, then we'll be opening escrow.
Yeah, let me fill that out just a little bit if I can, in case people don't know what a letter of intent is. It's a simple letter that states the terms at which they would be willing to buy a business.
Their business.
And it has outlined terms in it. Of course, it includes the price, of the business and other terms, including non-compete, including consultation and employment agreements are mentioned in it.
Notes.
Whether there's a note, those are all financial terms, and the difference between that and the purchase agreement is the purchase agreement has all the details in it. So for larger businesses, it's easier to get the LOI out first, and then as due diligence is going on, the attorneys are building the purchase agreements. For smaller businesses, it's fairly easy to get the purchase agreement out quickly.
So, let's see, opening escrow. I think I mentioned that can take anywhere from a month, which would be very unusual, but for a small deal, and if it's cash and there doesn't have to be any loan or SBA involved, but typically maybe 3 weeks to do that. Yes, for businesses, I would say under $5 million. It could be under $3 million. I'd say closing will be held at an escrow office. Larger transactions are going to be handled at an attorney's office, and it often is a neutral attorney. It's not the seller's attorney or the buyer's attorney. The opposite party isn't that comfortable with the seller having his attorney there, but I've seen it both ways. And it can be held, just remotely. It doesn't even have to be an attorney's office. I've seen it just all through the internet. Escrow can handle it that way. So I want to thank everybody for getting on today. Before we do any questions you have, feel free to send John or myself an email, or feel free to call us, and we'll definitely be ready to invite you to our next. So if anybody has a specific question, this is the time to have us answer that for you. Any questions?
Hi, Joan. How are you?
I'm doing great.
I'm just curious, what does it take to get your company evaluated? I mean, would that be something you guys would do, or, I mean, I have an idea what it's worth, but it's, you never know, so.
Right. We have different ways of doing it for smaller transactions under $2 million, $3 million. We do those in-house. If you'd like, and depending on your wishes, we have two other companies that we use that do valuations, and we get a price for you once you decide which way you'd like to go. Okay.
Is that something that is in the contract, or is that something you guys offer, or is that something we pay for?
Oh, the seller pays for the valuation.
Okay.
And it's yours. You own it. Uh-huh.
Okay. Uh-huh. Got it.
Thanks.
And typically that is...
Okay, I think we'll sign off for now, and thank you each for attending. And if you have any particular questions that are targeted to your particular business, feel free to call John or myself. Thank you so much, and we'll let you know when the next webinar is. Thank you so much.
Has been muted.